the reason we're doing this space is there was a piece of research that came out a little while ago that was basically researching creating assets with AI. So basically, the root concept of this thing is that you can take any image that you have and put it into the system, and it's able to turn all the things in the view into assets that you can now manipulate. And so I'm bringing Joey in on this conversation because he is a very practical person. He produces for Tested for Adam Savage's company, and he works with a lot of practical effects. He likes to film. He's been cinematographer on a lot of my projects that involved a lot of both physical and digital assets. So he has a pretty broad knowledge of the production space from a wanting to just make things in a real way point of view, but he hasn't leapt into the AI space almost at all. I don't know if I set you up for any response to that, Joey, but
no, yeah, that was great. Yeah. I mean, for full disclosure, we had a chat yesterday, and as I've been processing it, I realized I think I barely comprehend a lot of it. So it's great that we're redoing this a little bit so that I can sort of have time to mull over some of the stuff we talked about yesterday and then ask some follow-up questions or hopefully articulate some questions better this time around, because it's dense. There's, like you said, there's a lot of information in that space that I think you being so, you have been marinated in for a long time. And so if we get to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, and actually the thing that started this is I did a post a little while ago kind of raving about how game-changing this research was. And one of my visual effects friends, Javi, who may or may not hop in here, basically was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so we had a long conversation, and I was like, oh, I need to kind of recreate this with someone else that is now not quite as deep into it. So I think the main place to kind of start with this is that, we basically had 2.5 years of, maybe 2 years for most people, of being fairly familiar with this idea of generating something from words and having that be novel, because you can, see images that look like some sort of final output. But one of the key problems in that is that most of how anyone interacts with anything, let alone media, is the ability to use something consistently and use something in different scenarios, which broadly is an asset. Being able to have something that is, translates in every way between projects, between places in scene, and you can control those things. So the reason this research is so important is because this is the first research I've seen that has really made a focus of taking the elements of your AI and making them fully controllable assets from the get. You put the image in, you can choose, it recognizes objects, and you can make those into basically 3-dimensional objects that you can move around the scene, move to a separate scene, and swap with other assets, that kind of thing.
So real quick, so this research is basically, it's bridging the gap between highly conceptual AI imagery and what people like Javi and modelers and filmmakers, how they perceive assets and how they are used to working with assets. This is sort of bridging the gap between those two. Is that?
Yeah. Correct? And so the interesting thing with this is that there's two elements. One is like the basic functionality that we expect as creatives to be able to manage things. I mean, telling a story or playing a video game is the management of assets over time. So that basic function, seeing access to that, is very exciting. But it's not really, it's just a step in the right direction. But the thing that's actually more exciting about it is it starts indicating the part that from the beginning has been the thing that is very exciting about these systems, is that they're interpretive. They can understand things and understand the implications of something based on the patterns of reality. So in this paper, if you make a car, if you generate this car model and you move it into a night scene, not only will it take on the lighting of the night scene, but it will turn on the car lights, because that's an assumed pattern of nature of that. If you're driving at night, the lights would turn on. Not to say you might not want to have that sometime turned off sometimes, but that being able to be an option that automatically you move something basically in the same way that you might be on set, Joey, and ask someone to go drive down the street. You're not going to ask that actor, oh, by the way, make sure you turn on the headlights. Right. That's kind of an assumed thing. You basically tell them not to turn on the headlights, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is like, it's taken the asset out of that sort of completely, like it takes the asset from living into a vacuum into, living into the scene of what you're doing, or the context of what you're doing, without you having to sort of dictate every single hair movement, light, turn it on, etc.
Exactly. And we use simulation for things like, hair movement and stuff like that too. We just have to do a lot of setup to get there, in the visual effects space, at least. And so, the right now, these objects are rigid. You have a thing that's a physical object, and you can move it around, whatever. But because you have to train each object, and you're basically making a volume, which is let's say 3D cloud of that thing, because you can turn it around, but you can't yet just fly up to that thing and grab the door and open the door as an implicit action. That's an obvious way to move forward with this stuff, is for it to be able to, build assets on the fly, or even better, if you're able to, what's called tokenized, the elements of, or the details of any given thing. So the broad way to think of that is when you type into ChatGPT some sentence, a cat with orange hair, it's not actually seeing words. It's broken all those words up into little tokens. And then that pattern of tokens, it's interpreted as a thing that it can, it connects with another thing. And so those tokens don't have to be words. They can be, a physical motion of a brushstroke. They could be how a curve on a thing looks, or the slight color change, or whatever. So kind of in the way that a picture's worth 1,000 words means that it would take a lot of description to get a really accurate picture. You could have that made up of, 3,000 tokens could make up that picture, which means you grab a thing and it starts understanding the implications of, oh, you're moving that entire character. Oh, you moved their hair off their shoulder, and all of that becomes dynamic then.
Okay.
So this is going beyond this current piece of research. So the research that is this exciting launch position, sort of, Thomas Kipp sent me, because I was waxing poetic about tokenized assets as an exciting thing. He goes, hey, we did some research similar to that. But this is actually like a student research paper by Ziyi Wu. I don't actually know exactly how the dynamic of a research paper works in Google. Google did this research, I believe. So there's no indication that Google is putting a large amount of compute behind this or anything, or taking it to the next steps. And that's part of the reason that I really want to kind of hammer this in, is because I want the things that make better craft, better input, the ability for you to draw or create something and have it become an asset in an AI space, so you can build your Star Trek and have that consistent spaceship and that consistent bridge that people are hanging out with and all that kind of stuff, or in.
Right. It was basically like we talked a little bit about like UI, but I mean, like what it sounds like what sounds like that's exciting about it is that it's sort of creating the tools and the the intelligence needed to actually put this stuff to practical use.
Yeah.
And use it in less of an abstract or conceptual way.
Yeah, and it kind of is the best of both worlds in an interesting way, because you can, we on set, we have happy accidents all the time, which is basically like the implicit chaos of the world interacting with what we did, of like, oh shit, those birds flew over that guy's head right as he said that line. That was amazing, So the idea that you could be out and filming your character and something that you orchestrated could do things that are the implied action or some level of chaos is basically taking like, okay, the chaos of AI has amazing implications. It has the capability of being really incredible. But when it's just the chaos, and with us trying to like sample chaos, basically, you're getting a lot closer to, just a purely exploratory tool and less of a craft tool, which I think a lot about. My kind of view on humanity is we got to be where we are because we have a really strong passion for creating stuff, for crafting tools and trying new things. And then we also have this really strong desire to travel and explore and find new things. And so right now, this version of the AI we're seeing right now reaches some people that are willing to fully just, or not fully, but heavily emphasize the exploration side, at the detriment of the deep control of crafting those tools. So I think what people aren't expecting is that something like this research could start taking it towards really being an amazing tool crafting system.
And it seems like a lot of the narrative around AI is on the former. It's on the chaos aspect of it, of like, what? Look at this. What? This is weird. Or like this is never going to work, and less about the look at what this implies for future, iterations.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's very justified. I mean, if you are only seeing versions of chaos, especially versions of chaos that someone wrote a practicing artist's name and said a puppy by this practicing artist, and they get something out that is very little other input, it's very easy to see why that would be just purely a threat and not something that looks like a tool. Right. Part of that problem is that so much of this enthusiasm is putting the compute behind just getting higher and higher fidelity. And if there's nuance, it seems like most of the nuance goes to, at least for now, goes towards intelligence. And by intelligence, I mean like the ability to execute work, basically, because that's where the market is excited about, because that's how we currently structured our system. But obviously the intelligence of a movie set is also important intelligence, because most of us that are on movie sets are choosing that movie set not because we think that that's the greatest business decision of our lives, but because we really love crafting and exploring in that way.
Right.
So I'm one of the things about this that is kind of cool is the idea of, if you're able to tokenize all assets, you get into an interesting thing of like, if you think about assets like you think about a document. So right now, if you put a document in ChatGPT, you basically gave it a world to work with, and you can say, ask it questions about that world, right? And those questions kind of play out like a timeline. So theoretically, you could have a bunch of things that you build with an AI through whatever, or non-AI, that you save as memories in a tokenized document style, and then be able to play that back as a stream of tokens that is basically a linear timeline that you can either go back and edit, or play like a video game, or have it react to your environment, or that kind of thing. And the really crazy thing about all this implicit stuff that I've touched on is that you can create butterfly effects. So the thing I've mentioned before to people is like, if you're making a pirate movie and you're like, oh, my captain of my pirate ship seems like kind of a loner, we should give him a pet to make him feel a little more like he's connected with something. You can go back to the first scene and put a pet parrot on his shoulder and just tell it to, follow that thread of that parrot being on the shoulder. And so maybe a couple scenes later, there's a sword fight scene, or, a ship raid or something. And that bird might just start flying around, because the implicit thing is that if there's a lot of commotion, the bird starts panicking, right? So then you go, oh, well, I'm going to go back to that scene and I want to film that bird to get shots of that bird. And maybe I don't like how it flew. I want to grab it, move it down here, and have it grab this hat off this captain. and now I'm going to reshoot that. And so you can have this, sort of weird thing where you can be reactive to things as if it's reality, but also just grab a thing that otherwise you would have no control to grab it and do an exact change.
And can you attach some kind of, I mean, I assume this is, I'm speaking ahead of time here, but like, I assume that at some point they'll develop ways to attach a lifespan or a timeline to these things. So let's say throughout the movie, the bird is getting beat up and losing feathers.
Yeah.
We can sort of pull into that asset or go into that asset and say, I want to go back to this scene. And so I want to see the bird X amount of days ago. And it understands the evolution, I guess, that the bird will take throughout this asset, so to speak. And
yeah. And I think actually a great way to test this kind of stuff is to just try to tell a story to an AI and see, as like ChatGPT, just start telling it a story and asking it to remember some of those things. And then as you're go, oh, actually, I want to change this thing and this thing. Can you tell me back the story with those changes? Or now that I've told you this whole story, can you tell me a follow-up story of what this bird was doing the day before it got on this ship, or maybe the origin story of how this bird became friends with this captain or something.
Right.
So yeah, because the interpretation goes both directions, and we're training this stuff on stories and reality and, video and everything. Then you start being able to sample as much or as little as you want. So the thing that is common with this stuff, and maybe this will change, but for now, it's pretty clear that the more you put in as an individual, the more you can break off the averaging of things. So if you just say make a pirate movie, you probably will get a fairly generic pirate movie that people go, yeah, I almost feel like I've seen this,
Right.
Whereas if you start going and tweaking it and you start messing with stuff, you draw a new symbol for, some element of the pirate's hat, and you design a new wardrobe and that kind of thing. You start looking at like, okay, now the style of it is starting to divert from the original path. And now we can add in new story elements that start diverting from how this path. So there is sort of an element of, you could come at this sort of almost a editable real-time documentary, or you could come at it as like a really controlled filmmaker that's just letting some things be implied, because obviously if that person lets go of that coin, it should drop to the ground and spin, right?
Yeah. And this all sounds like world building on the humans side is going to be just as, if not more important, to really fine tune a unique, storytelling experience for what you're doing when it comes to AI. Like you said, like adding these little details of symbols and extra little world flavor. Sort of guiding.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, a lot of people are very, they feel like concept artists are in trouble because everyone's using this pretty noise machine to conceptualize very quickly. And there's no doubt that is taking that space very aggressively right now. But as soon as you start having the ability for someone that can draw a lot of beautiful stylized things and has a lot of experience world building, suddenly they're able to build a unique and interesting set, and even maybe explore in ways they wouldn't have been allowed to or able to as aggressively before. And those people can now, basically build their entire world by themselves. So maybe they're not so focused on story. They just want to build the world, let other people write stories in that world, or play games in that world, or build games in that world. That can be an entire new market in itself of these people that have these, this world is this person's authentic world they built themselves.
Right.
So, I'm trying to think. I feel like we had a couple other points that we hit in that other space that went so well and so badly.
Um, yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about. I mean, you touched on the car headlight stuff, but also we mentioned the internal aspects of a car. Like the example I was asking about was like if a car was to crash another car, like would the innards of the car be correct? Like would the AI sort of are we training AI to that level of detail to a carburetor or cables would fly out?
Yeah, and that's a great example of the because there's both a good answer to that and a cool implication to that and how that goes is that so if you have a lot of training data of what it looks like for cars to crash, then the thing can implicitly understand how this thing is supposed to come apart. The rigid versions in this paper wouldn't be able to do that. I don't think they did any tests with that. There isn't any example of that in the paper. So it may be that if you took two of those cars and just slammed them into each other, you might get some, implied dent deformation in the side of the car as like a visual change to the thing, but it wouldn't be like a physical volume change because this one currently is a training thing, not just a patterns of edges thing.
Right.
But if you do have the ability for it to have dynamic assets, then you slamming that together, because it's seen many cars slam into each other, it would be able to start, making an obvious guess of what that looks like. And so, being able to have someone pull the steering wheel in a direction, the system knows what the implied action of turning a steering wheel does to the wheels. So you see the car turn and skid, slam in. A side slam looks different than other things, and it has seen enough to know the difference. But that's almost like in this world, that's almost like an obvious implication. The kind of more exciting version, to me at least, is if it's seen a lot of jet fighters, crash or a lot of, different types of ships crash into each other, or examples of miniatures getting slammed into each other, plus the car wrecks, and you put in a spaceship that you designed, it can make a guess as to what that crash should look like. But then because this world of dynamic assets would mean that you can go in and go, well, it made a guess, but there should not be a carburetor coming out of my spaceship. You can go in and take that asset out, which is already a function of this paper, and pop in a new asset and be like, okay, there you go. That's what it should be. With this paper, it would be a still image, what you get as the output, probably, as far as like how you're managing those assets. But the having them go further with this research would be that you can then just go, okay, now replay it with that new asset in there in that whole crash scene.
Wow. Okay.
I wonder, actually, let's see if someone wants to pop up just to see if we can get any more questions in here. Feel free to raise your hand. I'm also new to this raising hand thing, so I don't know where that's going to show up if someone does.
I'm going to try it here. Oh, there's
nope, that's that's a high.
Oh.
Yeah. We got Sixella in here who tried to save us from our last disaster. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered most of the stuff. And I guess the only other thing I can say really in this space is just that to me, the big importance of this is that we get people to put focus on this research. There is a world where this research is in some version not necessary. So let's say a system is trained on everything everywhere for long enough, maybe Sora 3 automatically just understands what assets are and understands what inputs are and all that kind of thing. It seems like, though, most of these AI systems usually need some sort of middle ground in order to be able to get enough data to like make that last step functional. So getting people to do something like this earlier, where they're making assets accessible, one, you actually just probably limit how many people have to lose their jobs in this transitional process, because suddenly people can see how useful all these different roles that are being shifted around right now are. And then two, you make it so that the final version of being able to have really deep control on every level just has enough data to get there. Did that mean anything, or did I just?
No. Yeah, I just don't have any follow-up on that one.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I think for you, like the probably the pipeline that I foresee as a near-term pipeline, because one of the problems with this stuff is obviously that someone like you or someone that has worked in traditional visual effects or whatever doesn't see an easy access point to this stuff, because you basically are learning a new system of just playing with chaos, right?
Yeah.
So it's not familiar. It doesn't really interesting to what you're excited about in your current pipeline. But if you're suddenly able to take something like, okay, well, I shot this scene and I really wish that there was this big, cool door in the background that they were walking past, because they're talking about how it's these ancient ruins and they're somehow magical. I just filmed it in front of some rocks. But if you could then go take a photo of a miniature of some little rocky doorway that you built and just literally set that in the shot without any other need than the photo and the footage you got, and it's going to match the lighting and how the sun's going in the rain, whatever, that suddenly becomes a superpower that is fully familiar, right?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the attempt to get folks like me in this creator space excited is from like Adobe, right? Like Adobe is big on pushing all the concepts, pushing all the stuff that you're talking about, the actual sort of ones and zeros of this all in the background, and just saying like, hey, here's a button that'll just like remove that tie or put a new tie on that person or do that, right? Like, I think that's the most of AI that I have been exposed to, and I can see, I can understand why Adobe is trying to sort of slowly, get the language of this stuff into people's sort of lexicon to understand a little bit before.
Yeah, and I think Adobe is kind of coming from a place of not knowing how to approach this, and I think actually part of that is a lot of people do see this as a interpretive noise generator that can fill in gaps or make guesses at things, because there just hasn't been a lot of this type of asset-like research. So people starting to be aware that this asset research would make it so that, oh, okay, now we can start changing how we think about this. And it's not, okay, well, we can fill in holes, I guess, and maybe we can style transfer. It's like those are ways of sampling noise to fill not super necessary production holes, where as far as you're being able to take a very small, low-cost production of just a couple people standing around, on either a soundstage or even just in a space you have and doing a performance. And then you can say, okay, here's the asset for this character. Here's the asset for this character. That soda can they're holding is now the important idol that everyone's trying to get a hold of. The entire scene is this set that we've built out of assets. And that stool that they sit down on is this chair that is like the commander's chair of the situation. All those important features being able to be something that you can not only use then and be in control of, but you can now be in control of them for an entire series. So obviously you can't make a full Star Trek series if you can't have a consistent spaceship that they're flying in, a consistent command chair, consistent controls that the people work at. If every single time you cut to those people, they look different and their environment looks different, or even just their environment, really, you go, okay, well, it's really hard for me to hang on to this world. It's not really anything. It's just a lot of noise. So you end up with a lot of trailers and a lot of music videos and a lot of things that can handle flashy noise a lot easier than a stable story over time.
Right. So it sounds like the more impressive and interesting AI applications when it comes to the creative arts in the next coming years, it's going to be it's almost going to be the more of the invisible stuff, like the stuff that we and the consumers or on the uh, consumption side of media would barely even recognize or
Yeah. So
understand, and it all just happens in the background.
yeah, so like that's why I'm not a big. There's a thing called Comfy UI that's setting up all these different nodes and connecting how you sample. It's almost like a music sampler system of you're setting up all these nodes and being able to sample how noise interacts with your footage or your whatever. Um, I'm not saying people won't continue to use that for a while, and maybe even there'll be versions of it long into the future. But it's a very different thing than how people are used to interacting, like you're saying, just in a natural way with things. So if you're filming something and you're like, oh shoot, this scene doesn't make sense where this person's facing the wrong way. If you can just literally turn their body and they still have the same performance, but you just turned their asset, suddenly that's like a superpower that seems natural and like no big deal to you because all the difficulties happening on the back end.
Yeah. So given what you have been observing the last few years that this has been going on, and your expertise in filmmaking and content generation in general, like who will be the first sort of group of or wave of folks that will benefit the most, or not benefit the most, but be able to like jump into this and use it the most to their advantage in terms of being a useful tool? Like, is it the VFX folks, or is it this like directors or single vision filmmakers?
Well, I think the obvious group will probably just be the people most desperate to test everything, just because the novel thing gets the most noise. So you being able to just do the thing and put it out there in the world, people will be like, "Whoa, that's crazy!" Then after that, you have the filmmakers are probably going to be early because they are so anxious to tell their stories and basically work against a roadblock at all times. But I think at that point you start seeing concept artists start going, wait a minute, I can start building my worlds purely off drawing. Or if you enjoy the sculpting process or whatever, those kinds of processes as well. The only reason I focus on the concept artist people is if you've ever seen any contests in the visual effects and concept art worlds, you usually have to separate out 3D modelers from 2D concept artists, just because the amount of time it takes to build, at least with traditional tools, assets and staging and lighting and all that kind of stuff, is generally quite a bit longer than it takes for you to two-dimensionally draw it out, if you're a skilled artist in that area. So they probably have the quickest access to these spaces, where someone that is 3D modeling may have, it may just take them more time to build their world than it would for someone that's a concept artist in the two-dimensional sense.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like the folks who are up against the largest barriers of entry, like to make a film, right? That's a pretty big barrier to entry. Like you have tons of things up against you, either financially or just from a skill level or just from who right? Like you need to get actors, you need locations, you need a camera.
Yeah.
I feel like those are going to be the folks that are most excited to test this stuff out, because they could, like you said, they can take their vision and put it on screen.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that is whenever I bring that point up, a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, that means that we're going to get tons of garbage. We're just going to get flooded with garbage." They'll point to the Harry Potter DJ warping thing that you see online that's going viral, basically purely for its novelty. Those kinds of things, they go, "Oh, well, it's just going to be a bunch of like rip-off noise that's very bad, whatever." The thing is that when suddenly you have the ability for everyone to make whatever film they're trying to imagine, for next to no cost, you end up with people getting their 10,000 hours in a lot faster, right? So you end up with a lot of rough stuff really early, but they are able to improve and get better at their craft much faster than we've been able to in our craft, because we have to get people to show up on set. We have to get money behind the thing. We have to, the lightest version of this is you and your friends. Friends sometimes don't show up. The heaviest version of this, where you really get to explore a dramatic world, is hundreds of millions of dollars. And suddenly having that, and like, to be real, a lot of people's excitement about film is initially inspired by those hundreds of millions of dollars ideas. So if that suddenly becomes a minimal cost, at lower risk even than getting your friends together, you have people really explore their craft in a pretty dramatic way. I was going somewhere else with that, but I forgot where I was going with it. Yeah. So anyway, the key to all of this stuff that we're waxing poetic about is that people have to get behind research like this neural asset research and start making dynamic neural assets that maybe you don't have to train it at larger scale so it understands more things. The one that I'm getting excited about currently is trained mostly on Waymo data. So it understands cars pretty well, but most other stuff it doesn't understand very well. So putting resources behind this instead of just, can we make the next sequential, video generator better, or make it so a chatbot can answer more questions, is a very exciting thing. And it has implications well beyond our field. Robots being able to understand how things break apart into their individual pieces and how those pieces function together. And what happens if they remove an element from if they take the steering wheel off that car, that robot knows now that they just made it so that that car is not drivable, at least unless it's a robo-taxi. Right. So they got to go get another steering wheel to replace it, right? So some of those things that seem obvious to us are probably more intuitive when you understand all the assets of reality, or at least the most necessary ones to function.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think we probably should not go forever with this thing. What are we at? 42. Let's give it one more try. See if anyone wants to ask any questions or jump up and say anything. And looks like we got no takers on that. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you jumping in and doing this twice, even after the ruin one. So, and hopefully this or other research will make it so that we can intuitively shoot something together.
Yeah.
We got a request. Let's see here. Hello.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Yeah, it works. So FYI, when you bring speakers up, there's a little bit of a 9-second elevator ride where we can't hear anything. Yeah. And then for requesting to speak, if you're a listener, then you just push the mic button, and then you can only raise your hand if you're already on stage. But I just want to double check before you close out on everything. So with the title, why this is the most important creation research I've seen in AI, what is this? Is that the neural assets?
Yes, neural assets. This is, I will attach it to the end of this in a second here. But I kept failing to make this space. So it was a comment on a bunch of versions of this. But yeah, I'll add the research to the end. I've put it on my page a bunch of times, so people can find it there, and I've ranted about it.
Got it. Okay, I just wanted to confirm that's what it was.
Yeah. And thanks for trying to help us out on the last attempt at this. I appreciate that.
Yeah, this can be a little tricky sometimes when the platform doesn't like it when you do too much, even though it wants you. It has these features available. It almost feels like you have to keep it really simple. Yeah,
I did a test by myself, and the test went flawlessly. I literally just turned on my phone and started recording. I was like, oh, hey, it works. That's great. So jumping on with Joey, I was like, okay, cool. It's just going to work. And it just kept failing. All
Yeah,
right,
no
well,
Great
worries.
on my end.
I'm gonna let Joey go back to work here, so he can keep making the physical things in the real world.
Well, thanks for having me on here. I feel like I'm grasping this all piece by piece a little bit more. So I'm more than happy to do this and do this again in the future if you want.
Yep, sounds good. Well, we'll probably learn something from the comments on this one, and we'll understand how to better move forward, and maybe the tech will get better too.
Awesome.
All right, have a good one, dude.
Hey,
Thanks for everyone listening.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.